Hello, everybody. It's been a while, and I've had a couple ideas about videos I'd like to make, but unless I feel pretty strong inspiration to do so, I won't. And this is kind of the confluence of two separate ideas that I've been thinking about for a while. Um, Basically, on the anarcho-capitalist subreddit, there's been a couple of posts about the Free State Project. They recently reached 20,000 signers to the petition to move. And since a lot of people were asking about it, not to me personally, but on that site, and since I found myself posting about it a few times on that site, I thought it would be a good thing to address a little bit. And I've made videos about it a few times in the past. About 2 years ago, I think, were the last explicitly on Free State videos that I made. But the other thing is, um, this kind of overlapped what's been happening with the primaries. The whole primary phenomenon is very interesting. I feel like New Hampshire and the national stage is kind of viewed as like the blue collar, everyman's town. It's quaint, and you have all of these people, these powerful politicians and their urbanite staffers, and the New York, Washington media establishment that kind of descends to a place that really they would never go if it were not for the primary. And it's a little surreal to see all these places that I'm familiar with in a mundane, everyday kind of sense be on national television. Just the other day when I went to go get a haircut, the two barbers, a pair of sisters, were complaining because the immediately adjacent building is Donald Trump's headquarters, and his staffers basically filled their parking lot, prevented them from really doing the kind of business that they should otherwise. Just this morning, I was at the gym and the TV was turned to Fox News, and they were having an interview from the Airport Diner, which is a restaurant that I drive past every day and that I've eaten at a few times. And sure enough, as I drove home, I could see the TV vehicles there. And, you just see all these place names, and it's kind of interesting and surreal in that sense. And you look, and on these social media apps, on the hookup sites, there's lots of guys who are coming from DC, from New York, staffers on the various parties, especially the Democratic parties. I didn't encounter anybody who was a right-wing staffer, but many who were Hillary and Bernie staffers, if that says anything. Um, so it's kind of interesting in that sense. Um, it's New Hampshireites are very jealous of their political sway in this area. That they are the first primary in the nation and whatnot. And I think that's kind of silly. I mean, politics in general, I think, is silly. And the idea that this relatively small state should have this much weighted emphasis um, is, strikes me as absurd. I know when I talk to my family back in Michigan, they are, not that they blame me for it, but they always comment, isn't it odd that a state with 1.3 million people can have this much emphasis on it, or other states, and there are many states that have 10 times that population, factor in almost none at all. They're so keen on it that they've made it a legislative mandate that whatever other primaries there are, they'll automatically try and change theirs to be before it. I think it happened a couple years ago with Nevada trying to raise theirs. So that's kind of interesting, but that's not really what I want to talk about. So let me start with some of my thoughts on like the Free State Project reaching its 20,000 goal. This took a long time, much, much longer than Soren's and the other people who floated the idea. I guess originally they communicated via a Yahoo group that apparently still exists. Um, I think the idea was that they would get 20,000 signers very quickly, and then everybody would move after that. And as it turned out, they got an initial burst. I think they needed 5,000 signers just to select a state itself, a very interesting process. Uh, and basically, there was stagnation. At one point, Walter Williams wrote an article about it. They had a slight uptick then. And then they get slight upticks during Pork Fest, which is probably the Free State Project's biggest annual event, and I would say probably the biggest libertarian event that I know of in the world. It's certainly worth coming if you haven't. Um, and that's certainly, I mean, I didn't sign at Pork Fest, but had I not gone to Pork Fest, it's very unlikely that I would have moved or in any way become affiliated with it. But or maybe not. That's hard to conjecture. But um, basically it became stagnant. And this is surprising if you think about every year there's a cadre of bachelor, single, young, rootless libertarians who are graduating from college and from high school, and primarily male, although not exclusively. And these are the exact perfect people to move. Once people have families, once they have established careers, once they have mortgages and houses and debts, it becomes much more difficult to move, usually. Sometimes people find themselves in situations, even if they do have families, where it's not too difficult. But in general, it becomes a much bigger thing. And so those people, and I have many subscribers and I have friends who, they have families, they have careers, and for them to move would be a big sacrifice. And no one's going to say that they need to do that. And I'll just throw it out there. And I've said this many times, no one is obligated to agitate for libertarian causes. No one's obligated to make YouTube videos or to post content or debate or try and proselytize. And certainly no one is obligated to move to New Hampshire to join the Free State Project. I don't speak of it in those terms. I think that it's a very interesting phenomenon that's going on. It is achieving results that are fascinating that I'll go into a little bit here. And I think for those of you who are very libertarian minded, it's not a bad place to live. In fact, I rather like living here. Um, it's actually good in the objective sense of, are there jobs, the cost of living, all that sort of thing, are there opportunities, all that stuff is here. um, if you live in some of the really bad urban environments in New York or New Jersey or LA, I mean, when I was considering places to move, I didn't only think about New Hampshire, and there were certain places that, even though they might have a lot of opportunity job-wise, were completely no-go. Places like Illinois, just for things like gun rights, New York, and that's certainly, one thing. And I get annoyed when I read so often the number one reason I hear people like, yeah, it's a great idea, I'm not going to move because it snows. I mean, if that's a joke, then fine. If that's the actual reason, think of a better reason, because you have someone, especially if you're an anarcho-capitalist, who's saying, do you want to abolish the state, gradually or right away? And yet you're not willing to, go to the trouble of living in a place where there's snow for a couple months out of the year. You're basically broadcasting that your convictions are, this deep. And think of a better excuse then. And there are better ones. You have family, you have school, you have a job. You don't feel that your primary focus should be to relocate for a libertarian. I like those are all great reasons. I'm not gonna besmirch anyone who has it, but if your reason is that, I mean, I had a little start with someone on Reddit whose name was Liberty Above All, and I commented, so you should change it to Liberty Below Climate. It's really not a big deal to shovel your driveway every once in a while and wear a jacket. And actually, there's a lot of winter sports that you can get to love if you want. But that's just a pet peeve of mine. I mean, the worst example was Brian Doherty in his article praising the Free State Project, and he goes to all these lengths to say what a great thing it is and how amazing it is. And like his wife, Angela Keaton, she comes by to PorcFest fairly frequently. I've met her a couple times. And then he adds, but I'm not coming because it's cold. Well, don't say that it's this great thing and it's amazing and it's this really hopeful thing that's actually happening, but you're not going to take part because it's snowing. And maybe he was joking, but think of a better joke, because that's basically saying it's not that important. It's so unimportant that the fact that it's not like California where he lives now, he's not going to move. And he's someone who probably has a great excuse. He's working for Reason. He probably would have a difficult time pursuing his writing career if he didn't live in a place like New York or DC or wherever he lives. So that's fine. That annoys me. But anyway, every year though, there has to be a few thousand at least, if not a few tens of thousands of libertarian and in fact fairly radical libertarians who are finishing college, who are finishing high school, who would be the perfect people to emigrate to New Hampshire. And those people just weren't targeted. The Free State Project was not like actively marketing people to sign. And so eventually they brought somebody in and started a concentrated effort There were people who, like Mark Edge and Free Talk Live, and there are a couple other people who were kind of solely leading phone banking, that they were calling lots of people, that they were trying to individually drum up interest, and they were getting signers, but one here, one there. They basically developed an expensive Facebook algorithm that started targeting exactly the people who would be most likely to move, and sure enough, they started getting the numbers. It was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago that I was hearing things like they only have so many hundred left to go, and then they fell silent for a while, which I thought was weird. I thought that they were making projections that it would fill up 3 weeks ago, and didn't hear anything until I think last week. Apparently, they were waiting to verify that everyone was real, and that they actually had the number before they came out and announced anything. So it's a big milestone for the organization and for the movement. More people have been moving all the time. They have new movers parties every month. People come from all over the world. There's a large number of people who are coming from, say, Brazil. You get people from Europe, all across the United States. I'm very curious about how many of these signers are likely to move. Sorens has estimates that he's made based on previous experience, and he thinks it's somewhere around a third. I tend to think that people who signed up 10 years ago and haven't come yet likely aren't. The contract is not binding. Maybe there's a degree of social pressure, and maybe there's also an element of, okay, well, since this is apparently happening, now I will, whereas before you could always say this is never going to happen. Um, so in terms of its effects, I think it's very interesting. The uh, political effects are actually quite substantial when you think about the numbers of people who have come. I was reading in an article from a local paper that Free Staters make up 0.5% of the population, so a tiny, tiny, tiny uh, sliver of the population, but they make up 5% of the legislatures at the state level, uh, which is an overrepresentation. What is that, of 10 or of 100? 10 times? Yeah, 10 times overrepresented. And that's with only 1,500 to 2,000 movers probably. Um, so 5 to 6 times more people, or 10 times more people if all 20,000 moved, which I think is optimistic but not impossible, considering that there will probably be people who will continue to move who haven't signed up yet and maybe never will sign up, but will move anyway. Um, that's a lot. I mean, how many states can you name, or you know of, where 5% of the legislators are basically very radical libertarians? Now, what party affiliation these people have varies. Some of them count themselves as Democrats. Some of them count themselves as Republicans. When I first moved, I actually went on a date with a guy who is an anarcho-capitalist, but he was elected as a Democrat. Um, and he was so modest about it that he didn't even mention that he was in the state house. We had dinner and hung out, and I didn't learn until months later that he was actually in the state house. Um, and how many active anarcho-capitalists are there in other state houses across the country? Maybe there are a few, but it's quite rare. Well, whereas here it's no, well, it's a thing, and beyond that, there's a political organization called the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, and they have a very high rhetorical influence on the GOP in the state. The GOP has been radicalized along those lines to a decent degree, and it's something that the politically minded leftists of the state are absolutely terrified of. They have been saying now for years that the biggest threat to the state are free staters and their influence within the state. Um, the idea that free staters are ever going to be like a majority of the state, I think that's, not ever going to happen, but that wasn't really the point. Um, the fact that free staters can, and the influence that they bring, can swing votes one way or the other, means that the votes are going to swing a libertarian way as opposed to a not libertarian way, and that's already started to happen. About a month ago, there was a mayoral election in Manchester, which is the largest city in New Hampshire. It's also the city that I live in, and it was not a stark choice in the sense of like, well, we've got a Ron Paul and a Hillary Clinton, but we have a raised tax candidate and a lower tax candidate, and it was a very, very close race. But Manchester has over 1,000 free staters in it, and the lower tax candidate basically solicited the Free Staters' help, and I didn't even know about it. I certainly didn't vote, but enough did that he won the election by about less than 80 votes. I think it was 78 votes. And here again, this is the largest city. This isn't some very small burg or hamlet. Although there are a couple of very small burgs and hamlets that have been taken over. This is the largest city. And politicians across this state certainly take note of that. Now, politics has a limited value, I think. And I've made videos long ago basically saying that I think that if you're devoting your life to politics, it's a waste of effort and it's a waste of time, and that we're not going to see I mean, there are definitely political decisions that could be more or less libertarian, and those kind of things happen all the time. In fact, almost any bill you can imagine could have a more or less libertarian outcome. And you certainly have candidates who are more or less bad. Rand Paul, for his flaws, is not as bad as any number of these other people. If I was looking at the candidates today, I would say somebody like Bernie Sanders is probably the best because he's the least likely to get anything done. But um, just and because I think right wingers make better opposition than left wingers do, because I think they're terrible opposition. But um, there's a limit to that. That doesn't really go that far. Even if we get a vote, if we manage to get a vote one way, the vote could go another way, some other point. But I think changing people's zeitgeist, changing people's ideology, changing the society, I think these are actually much more fundamental things. And this is something the Free State Project is also doing. Um, and that I think is in long run more significant. And one thing, the numbers aren't huge, but they are raising the ratio of libertarians in the state, and they're also galvanizing the libertarians that are already here. There's a certain amount of libertarian rhetoric that's in New Hampshire. There were native New Hampshireans, New Hampshireites who are libertarian, and those people have become more galvanized. They've become more active, and their ranks have kind of swelled from these, imported libertarians from all over the world, mostly from the United States, but from all over the world. Um, and I think just, step back and think for a second. Raising the ratio of the libertarians in society is going to have fairly profound effects, long term and short term. And it's kind of almost surreal. So many people that I've talked to over the years have said, I don't know any other libertarians. I never meet other libertarians. I'm alone. I live in this place and there's no one I can agree with. And, the internet has allowed these people to kind of meet each other online. But other than like a few cities like New York or maybe San Francisco or LA, where there's a large enough population that, a small population of libertarians can also exist, you don't meet libertarians. But here you do. And it's something I get reminded of on a weekly basis. I'll go to a restaurant and the person who's working there is a free stater that I know. I'll go to the gym and encounter free staters. That's happened several times. Most awkwardly, I guess, was in the steam room. I was talking to a guy. He was a teenager of some type. I think he was 17, 18 years old. Talking to him, and his father came in, and I'd seen these guys at the gym for a couple months, and we were on a friendly, hey, how's it going basis kind of relationship. And this was a year ago, but I mentioned that I had been to a conference in DC, and the father asked what conference, and I said the Students for Liberty conference, and he goes, oh, are you in the Free State Project? Which I thought, oh no, this guy knows what the Free State Project is. I'm going to have to get in an argument right now in the steam room, and I'm about to have heat stroke, so it's not a good time for that. But he said, oh, I am as well. And he was as it turns out, one of the original signers and one of the original movers, and that they had actually moved 7 or 8 years ago, and he had 4 children, and what was so odd is his son did not even know that was the reason that they lived in New Hampshire. That was the reason that they moved. And the next day, his son actually approached me and said, can you explain what this is all about? My dad was very vague about it all, which I thought was very interesting. But, the other thing that I've noticed happening is just for me interacting with people who aren't free staters, who aren't libertarians, once they find out why I'm here, once I've established a good rapport with those people, they tend to they become curious and they start to ask me questions. And so rather than have a debate where I'm antagonistically going to them and challenging their beliefs, they're out of interest coming to me and asking me what mine are. And I'll use two examples to illustrate this, one of which happened last night, which is kind of the reason this video is happening. Um, so uh, the guy that I've been dating, uh, we talked about lots of things, not about politics. I avoid like having debates about politics. But certainly, why do you live in New Hampshire? And, I mentioned the reasons, and I don't say Free State Project first. I'll say the other reasons. I like to hike. I like its proximity to a lot of things, and also for political reasons. I like the low taxes and the few gun laws and that sort of thing, and the Free State Project. So uh, one of these guys sent me a picture, and he's like, "Hey, look, I got my order from Amazon." And he had several books that we talked about, several books on health, and then the Game of Thrones, the Song of Fire and Ice books from Martin, which he'd said he'd heard about and thought they were good, and I said yes, they are good, worth reading. And those were all the books that we had talked about. We hadn't talked about any other books, but on the bottom of the pile there was another book, and we hadn't discussed any other books, and I said, "What is that other book on the bottom?" And he goes, "Oh, that's Libertarianism, a primer by David Boaz." And so I hadn't told him to read about libertarianism or suggested that he do so or anything along those lines. I just said that I am. That's the reason I'm here. And he was interested enough to look online and find that book. Now I said, okay, now that's not actually a really good book on it. And I went ahead and took my copy of The Problem with Political Authority by Michael Huemer, and I said, here, read this instead. And he has read it now, and I've asked him what he thinks, and he's like, it's amazing. This makes perfect sense. The arguments here are amazing. And so this guy is like, I mean, is he going to become an activist? Is he going to start, waving the NCAP flag? No. But his political ideology has shifted immeasurably from where it was. And honestly, it wasn't even hard. I mean, you could say that I did a little footwork of, going out to dinner with him and going to the movies and talking to him about lots of unrelated things. Um, A, that was fun to do anyway. B, that's actually how you do it. If you read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, people are ruled by their emotions, and if you come to someone in an antagonistic way to convert them forcefully, other than a very small percentage of the population that um, uh, responds very well to analytical and logical arguments, people are going to react negatively to that and defensively, and they're not going to be persuaded. They're going to be positively unpersuaded. Um, However, if you establish yourself as someone who's a friend, that they can trust, somebody that they respect, then they're liable to listen to you. And that happened again last night. So yesterday was the primary, and honestly, I don't care. I don't think that the elections really matter that much. I mean, earlier in the video I was talking about, New Hampshire's influence on the election or whatever, and I even hesitate that because the whole process of elections are just kind of kabuki formalities to it's like a ceremony that conveys legitimacy on the government, but it's not actually like a governing thing. There's a lot of articles today, right, about how Hillary Clinton, despite losing New Hampshire hugely to Bernie Sanders, is still going to get more delegates just because the system is rigged. And it's rigged on so many levels. And it's just annoying. The level of debate that happens is, in general, so ridiculously nauseating that, I'm glad that I don't have television and that I don't listen to the radio and that I'm not subjected to it more than what I see in the changing room at the gym, or what I hear from the Hillary staffers who are looking to be on their back tonight. Anyway, um, I was at dinner with another guy, and again, we're talking about where we grew up, and when we met before. This is a guy that I'm friendly with, and the normal banter dialogue that you've had. And he did know that I moved here for political reasons, but I didn't stress them. I didn't go into a diatribe about how much I hate the government or the hypocrisy of Obama or anything like that. Um, but he asked, "Hey, did you vote today?" This was yesterday after the primary was over. And I said, "No, I don't believe in voting." And he was quite surprised. And he's like, "Well, why don't you?" And uh, we're past the point where he's going to view me as an antagonistic person that he needs to be threatened by. And so I just explained, some of the simple things like, I don't think I have the authority to rule other people. I don't think I can go and tell a person over there, pointing to some of the other patrons at the place we were eating and tell them you need to follow this regulation and you need to pay this tax and you need to be drafted or whatever else. I don't have that authority. And as a result, I can't really delegate that authority to somebody else. The idea, since I can't do that, I can't vote for you and then have you do it. There's a logical leap in there, an ethical leap in there that I just don't see being made. And then I also talked about, why I don't think it's effective, why it doesn't yield good decision making, and why I think it's just kind of a scam to shed legitimacy. And of course, he's nodding the entire time. Now, again, I'm not saying this guy is gonna, show up at the next Ron Paul rally or become an anarcho-capitalist, but he definitely, was swayed much more effectively than anything else. And the thing is, there's thousands of libertarians in this state now who are probably doing this to a more or less extent all the time, every day. I'm not even like trying. I didn't meet these people with the intention of persuading them. It just eventually comes up, and once it does, if you comported yourself well, if you're somebody that they respect, they're going to listen to you. Now, is every libertarian who moves here somebody that is going to be able to do that? Probably not, because there are, of course, people here, just as there are in any population, who maybe aren't that respectable. That can happen, but the opposite can happen. And so, yes, you look at the number of free staters, and there's me, but you know what? And those aren't the only two I could name. I could go on. There's more. There's a multiplier effect. And is it diluted? Are any of those people going to be as active as me? No. But how active am I really? I mean, I've never voted here. I've donated to one political campaign for somebody that I knew was running for state house, and he got elected, which I think is a good thing on balance. I wouldn't devote all of my income to that or all of my time to electioneering or anything like that, but a little effort here and there sometimes can make a difference, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So, very interesting. And I think that my persuasion of these people is so much more valuable than if I had gone and voted for, anyone who was running. I think there are exceptions if you're voting like as a protest vote to someone like Ron Paul or whatever. That doesn't mean very much either. That would mean far less than what I ended up doing. But it wouldn't necessarily be bad. So I think that's an interesting aspect. And look, I'll just be driving around town and I'll see Free Staters walking around. There's sections of the city that a large proportion of the people who live there are Free Staters. Um, and more come every day, and that's good. And we have more and more people who are getting out of the I'm a renter and I just moved here into the rentier status, people who own property, who own businesses, who and those people, I mean, the ones who own property, they tend to want to rent it out almost exclusively to other free staters. And that's kind of been like a conduit. If you want to move here, it's actually very easy because you can find somebody who's a free stater who basically wants you to move here and will give you a good deal. And that happens quite a bit actually. And that's facilitating the immigration. So again, I don't say any of this. I guess it kind of sounds like an advertisement. Of course, it's not perfect and it's not for everyone, and I wouldn't say that. I just think it's very interesting the effects that it's going to have long term. Sorens gave a presentation at PorcFest basically outlining what decisions could swing in favor of, realistically swing in favor of free staters, on given issues. And the cumulative effect of even relatively minor swings over time is actually quite significant. And I think that's the main point. I think a lot of people chastise the movement because they say, look, even if you got 20,000 or even if you got 50,000 people, that's not the majority of the population of even a small state like New Hampshire. So, it's pointless. You're still a minority. That's not pointless if you become a swing vote. And it's not pointless if you affect the zeitgeist of the broader society, which definitely are. Um, so, and that was never the point. That if they had thought that they wanted to make a majority, they never would have set it at 20,000. They would have said, "Oh, we need, uh, you know, uh, 650,000 at least." No, they never would have said that. Um, so I think that's a bit of a straw man of their strategy there. So we'll see what happens. See if people continue to move as they do. We're very curious to see how many of the people who signed up and haven't, what they'll do. Presumably, the organization has their contact information and will contact them all and say, hey, in case you haven't heard, um, we actually have the 20,000 signers. And like, if some large proportion of them were to come, or even a relatively small proportion, let's say if there's one and a half or 2,000 people here now, if 4,000 or 5,000 came in addition to that, that would multiply the effect considerably. I mean, that, and can I predict like A, how many will come? No. And can I predict what the exact results will be with any given number? Of course I can't. All I can say it's going to raise the ratio of libertarians in the state, and that's going to affect things, and it's going to have a ripple effect. For every person who comes, there's going to be several more people who are in the state who are going to become swayed to one degree or another. Maybe they'll become proponents, or at least they'll become less antagonistic. And yes, there's a counter effect. The communists and the leftists in the state will become galvanized against it, but there's nothing they can really do. I mean, they've been complaining about it now for some time. So anyway, I just thought that would be kind of an interesting topic, since a lot of people seem to be talking about the Free State Project the last couple of weeks, and because of the primaries, which I don't think are that important. And I just thought it was a good demonstration of. I thought the conversation that I had with this other person about voting yesterday was more important than actually having voted or not having voted. And that kind of that's an actual social change. That's a shift in somebody's opinion and how they think about the world. And we'll see how my other friend is still reading The Problem with Political Authority. When he's done, we'll see if he's ready for another one and go from there. But anyway, I'll talk to you all later and have a good day.